Insurance training. My name is Julie Wallace. I work for AECOM on a contract to support the AFCEC Air Quality SME, Mr. Castaneda. The topics that we're going to cover today range from, data inequalities, reporting tools and tips and tricks for conducting and making sure that your AEI is complete, correct, accurate, and that you understand what the data is in your AEI. You're not just looking at the numbers. So hopefully you will find it useful, and hopefully it will help you with your AEI this year. I don't have a lot of slides. A lot of this training is going to be just working in the database. So we're going to talk about AEI data quality. The first thing is emission inventory submittals. We're going to talk about the new functionality that is in there. I know that has caused some people some problems maybe with submitting their AEI. The fact that it requires a comment if you're exceeding certain thresholds. So we'll talk about that for a minute. And then we're going to talk about mostly the business objects reports that are available to all installations that can be used to quickly identify any issues or review data to help prevent issues in your data set. Okay. So first things first, we're going to talk about the emission inventory submittals. So I'm just going to go into APIMS. Right now, I don't know. Let me see. I'm going to change my base real quick. One of the things is I am working in a data set that each base does not have exactly the different scenarios. So we're just going to go to emission inventory submittals. We're just going to look at the 2022 AEI for Lackland. This is one that I am familiar with. And so we're going to talk about that. So the first one is to stage your data. These screens should be familiar. You should have seen this before. It's very similar to what it has always been, where you have to select specific emission calculations to include in your AEI. And then to verify emissions, this is where that new functionality comes in. So as you can see here, we've got an alert that says this exceeded the air facility emission threshold preference. And we can see another alert here that says this exceeds the PMO emission threshold preference. Now, when you see that, oftentimes it will require a comment, and it will not let you publish your AEI until the comment has been added. Now, one of the things that I have seen is something like this, and I'm using this as an example because it'll say get with JBSA.
Hey, Julie?
Yes.
I don't think that we're seeing anything on the screen if you're sharing something.
Oh, I am sharing. Nobody's seeing anything? Okay, hold on.
Maybe it's just me, but
I can see it.
Share again. Okay, I unshared and then shared again. Is that working?
I don't see it on my end, but this could be me, just so continue on, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Is anybody else having this problem?
I can see your screen.
Okay. Well, in the AEI screens is where we're at. So there's a comment here, and I'm using this as an example because it says get with the base installation, okay? That is not a preferred comment, although it does say, hey, reach out to us, we understand it. I would expect something more like, and in this particular case, I happen to know what this is. The correct comment here would be something like large purchase of traffic marking paint in the CE horizontal shop caused a spike in this hat because the material, so basically a large purchase, an abnormally large purchase for a big project caused the HAPs to be higher this year than we would expect in future years. Another one that I have seen was the natural gas supply to the installation became unreliable and they were forced to use their diesel boilers for longer than they normally do. And so some sort of comment like that just kind of explains, hey, we had an abnormally cold winter. We had a lot of emergency hour run times for our generators due to a weather event. we had a large bulk ESO purchase for this one project. Things like that are the types of comments that we need to see in here. Now, the other thing that I have seen people do in here is they're in a hurry. They don't know why their emissions are different. And so they just enter a space or a tick or some sort of character to let it think that there was a comment entered in here. Okay, so it's best to try and avoid that type of comment. Now, I understand that this functionality was released and maybe people weren't aware of some of the tools that I'm going to show you in a minute that can really help you identify why you're seeing what you're seeing. Okay, so this is a good tool though to see, okay, this year I had 4 tons of HAPs and last year I had 0.3 tons of HAPs. Okay, now when I look at this screen, does this mean I have a problem with the AEI this year? Maybe, maybe not. It could be, and this happens quite a bit. It could be that this year's AEI is correct and last year's AEI was wrong. So make sure that you're open to the possibility that mistakes may have been made in the past that are causing a large difference between the emissions, okay? So any questions about these screens? Anybody had any problems with some of these screens and the fact that it's requiring a comment? Okay. The other thing that you shouldn't do is, and I see this a lot, is a lot of people just leave their AEI in a stage status because they don't know what comments to put in here. And so it will never activate that publish button. And so they just leave it in a stage status. That's not what the Air Force would like. Now, with that being said, if you're having troubles trying to find out what the differences are, please reach out for support. Reach out through AFCEC, give me a call. I can help you out and try and figure out maybe where your emissions are coming from. But hopefully this class will teach you how to do that and identify what the differences are. Now, one thing that I want to talk about is you saw that there was a very large difference, right? So in this case, in this scenario that I talked about, the data is not wrong. So under normal circumstances, you should have emissions that are within a certain range of each other if you didn't have a large change in emission, okay? But that doesn't mean that every time there's a change in emissions, it's a data problem, okay? What it does mean is you have to understand why it's a problem. So if it's a data problem, that's easy. You fix it and then you don't have a large difference. But when you do have these deviations, if I'm a regulator, I'm going to want you to explain it. I want you to understand what's happening at your base and why your emissions are changing. So like I said, in this case, it was that they had a large project that required this particular traffic marking paint that they had to use. Okay. And so in looking at this, if anybody ever asks, why did you have it? Oh, it was because of this particular paint and we bought this much of it. And then everybody says, oh, okay, that sounds good. You're on top of it. You understand it. All right. So I just wanted to kind of show you these screens to know, like, this is the types of things that you're going to see. You're going to need to add a comment. Chances are you're going to have something at your installation this year that's going to require some sort of comment. Does anybody have any questions about these screens so far or had any problems in the past about these screens? All right, so this is once you're staging and submitting your AEI. But I want to take it a step back, that there's a lot of activities that you can do to make sure that your AEI is complete and accurate even before you run calculations. Now, so you should be running quality assurance all the way through the process of your AEI. So for that, let's go to reports and then custom. And we'll see how business objects is running for me. And if you go to folders, and then this is a little bit buried, but if you go public folders, public APIMS reports, PMO reports, air quality, there's 2 folders under here. One is quality assurance and the other one is quality control. So the first thing is we're going to start out in the quality assurance folder. And as you can see here, there's several reports that you can use, but we're going to key in on a few of them that can help you throughout your AEI development, okay? So the first one we're going to look at is the usage summary stationery. So to run this, you just double click it. Now, when you come into this report, it is going to have the data for the last base that ran this report. So you notice the base name here does not match my base name here. So be aware of it. The first data that you see will not be your data. You need to hit the refresh button up here at the top. Okay. And then there's going to be parameters, and it's going to ask you for your start date, your end date, and the base name. So to do that, you can come up here and you can hit the refresh button here, and it will give you a list of values that you can choose from. Sometimes this takes a little bit of time. Or you can enter in, like say we're looking at 2022, and you can search, and then it'll pull up anything that matches that pattern. So I'm just going to look for the date that I want. Once I select it, you can see that it updates it over here. At that point in time, I come down to the next parameter. Oops. Now, for most of you, you'll only see one base name. If you're an ISS, you'll have the tier 2 status, and so you'll see several base names. So for this one, I'm going to select Lackland, and then I'm going to run. This can be a somewhat large report with a lot of data in it, so it may or may not take a little while to run. I have pre-downloaded some reports with specific data that I want to demonstrate, but I wanted to show you the actual running of the report. We're just going to kind of look at this real quick before I dive into how you use this report. So first thing, it's going to have a different table for each facility at your installation. So if you're an installation with multiple facilities, as is the one I'm assigned to right now. So this is going to give you a list of all the processes that have had usage entered during the time frame specified, and it's going to show you what it is and what material. The next tab is going to talk about missing usage. This is going to look at all the active processes that do not have any usage entered for this time frame. Now, the next several reports, hopefully you won't have data on them. They are based off of many years of QAing AEIs and some of the common things we saw. Now, negative usage records usually only get entered in with something like the API interface. I don't know how many of you use it, but some of those things can happen here. So as you can see, we have no negative usage records, so that's not an issue. Now, this is usage with an end date before the start date. If you're entering things in AEI throughputs, it will not allow this. Once again, this is just with the API interface. However, you can make large mistakes with that, and if you have an end date before the start date, it won't count in your AEI. So this is just kind of some double checks to make sure that we're not doing any data entry errors or fat fingers. So once again, usage spanning over 365 days, usage in multiple years. And then you've got a UOM check, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute. Processes with usage and no emissions, and then inactive processes with usage. So all of these things are issues that can cause your AEI to not calculate emissions correctly. So I'm going to pull up an export of one of the reports, and I want to talk about what this is. So now to export this report, once you've run it, and remember there's multiple pages down here that you can scroll over to. But to export it, you click this little export button, and then you can select which reports or all reports to export to Excel, PDF, whatever format you want, and click export. Okay, and then you can save it to your drive. So to save time from, and just on the contingency that Business Objects doesn't like me today, I've downloaded a few examples from various Air Force bases of things that you want to look for. Okay, so now this one is going to show me every process that has usage. So this is a good accounting of where am I at in my AEI? What have I already logged usage for? It's also a good way to check for any data anomalies that maybe need to be cleared up. Okay, so for example, Did I make sure that this particular engine didn't have any emergency? One of the best practices may be to enter a 0 hours like we did for this one above, right? And so you kind of want to go through and look at that kind of thing. You can look for anything that looks out of the norm or is troubling, okay? So this is just a quick check of what have I already done. And then the next one is going to be what sources may still be missing usage. Now, this is a really good report to run while you're doing it because, as many of you know, you're getting things from either going to the shop and writing it on a note and then having to remember to go back to your desk and enter it. You're getting emails, you're getting phone calls. The data is coming at you in many ways, right? And so this is kind of a good check of what did I need to follow up with? What do I need to make sure I have documented before I run my calculations, okay? Now, these may or may not need usage. So you have to look at this. It's not a foolproof list. But if I'm looking at this particular report, and I'll defend you, Coda, this AEI is still in work right now at this point in time, so I knew it was missing data. But you can see that we don't have anything entered for ABCL. Now, it may be that these didn't have any usage during this time frame. And in that scenario, I highly recommend that you enter a 0 usage. Negative documentation can often be as important as actually entering the usage. That way, you're saying, I have confirmed that this source is still active during this time frame, and I can confirm that I made sure that it didn't have any usage. So in this case, 0 is a number, okay? So these ones I would expect to see usage for in some form before the calculations are run. Now, for these smaller organizational tanks, I'm obviously not going to have usage for every single little tank, right? And so when I look at this, I'm really only looking for my larger tanks. Were there any big tanks that I forgot about? And in this case, it looks pretty good. Now, as you can see, I'm still missing my fire training usage. So that would prompt me that I need to go talk to that shop and make sure that I get their numbers. I probably need to go talk to the POL shop as well and get my degreasing. So it's kind of a to-do list that you can check off and you can keep running this report. Now, I would say that during AEI, while you're doing your AEI, I would run this report pretty frequently, especially if you have multiple people that are working on the data entry for the usage, right? That way you can make sure everybody's on the same page with what still needs to be done. So anyway, this is the missing usage report. The data, once you enter the data in the front end, it usually only takes a few minutes for it to render the results in the report, okay? So you can go, work in the morning and enter data, run this report right after lunch, and you should be able to see all of the fruits of your labor from the morning, okay? Let's see, there was one other report I was wanting to look at with this. I think it was the processes with usage and no emissions. Okay, so now this one, the reason why this can be a problem is a lot of times people will enter usage for a new source. Let's say that you had a new source come on in June, you entered usage for it, you did everything you were supposed to, and then you ran your calcs, there's no emissions for it. Okay, so the reason why is you probably forgot to add that source to the calculation. So that's pretty common that you remember to track the usage, but you forget to enter, to add it to the calculation. So at that point in time, this is going to let you know, hey, you said this source was active, you said it should have emissions, and we didn't see anything. Okay, so that's also something that you should look out for to make sure that you are capturing. And it's a pretty common mistake that I see. All right, and then I have one more report that has a little bit different data for some of these other things. So let me look at that one real quick. Okay, so now this next report is we're going to talk about the UOM check. Now in APIMS, one of the most common mistakes I see is that people will put usage in the wrong units. The algorithm will take that number and calculate emissions. So it is giving you a number, but it's the wrong number. And so it's up to you to know what units of measure should my usage be. and it may not be the units of measure that the shop gives it to you in. So fire training, for example, they gave gallons, or no, they gave pounds, right? But the usage was supposed to be in gallons. Now for this particular one, it's not a problem because the number was 0. However, if this had been any other number, it would have calculated incorrect emissions. And unless you were going and specifically checking this, you wouldn't necessarily know right off of looking at it that those emissions were calculated incorrectly. Okay, so please make sure you check the UOM check. Another one that's really common, so some of the common sources that we have that have problems with that are fire with the pounds and gallons. Another one is somebody will say, I used 10 pallets, but the algorithm needs how many total pounds was that? I don't need a 10 count. I need 10 times the weight of a pallet, okay? Another one that we see a lot of problem with, I'm just gonna scroll down, is surface coating, okay? Surface coating is very common to be wrong. So in this particular one, this algorithm is looking for pounds, usage was entered in gallons. This algorithm is looking for gallons, usage was entered in pounds. So make sure that you understand the units of measure that you need. The last one that I talk about is when you're talking to your woodworking shop, they will oftentimes say that we had this 55-gallon drum full of, sawdust that we had to waste out, right? The usage is not gallons. You need to multiply that 55-gallon drum times the density of the wood. And if you need to know what wood density to use, I suggest you look at the Air Force Stationary Source Guide. It has a whole table of common densities for things like that, okay? So you can't just take the number that the shop gave you because it may not be exactly the number you need, okay? This report should help you identify any time you're gonna have a mismatch or an error. Now, like I said, these reports are not foolproof, as you can see, especially for OBOD and munitions. This one's looking for round, but I said each, those are the same. So I know I don't need to do anything. So you do have to apply some logic to this report. This report is just guidelines. It's not a definitive list, okay? And then the other one that we see a lot of is inactive processes with usage, okay? So then that begs the question, was the source inactivated incorrectly? Did I put usage to the wrong source? What source should it be going to? But basically, if you put usage to an inactive source, it's not going to calculate emissions. And so you need to know what happened here and what needs to be corrected. Okay. Like I said, these ones are 0 hours, but it's pretty common that we see this happen. I think there was a base that we were working with that they changed out an engine, right? But the shop had some sort of printed out paper that said, you put the usage against this process. Okay, so they end dated it. They put in a new piece of equipment, which meant a new process, and nobody ever told the shop personnel that were entering it. So they just kept entering against the process that they knew. And that went on for multiple years. So none of the usage for that particular source that got changed out ever got documented for a period of 2 or 3 years. Okay. And so these kind of reports can help mitigate mistakes or errors like that. But if you didn't have this report, you wouldn't even know to go look for problems like that, right? All right. Any questions about this usage report? Has anybody used this before? No? Okay. All right. It's very useful. I use it all the time when I am either doing QA or doing an AEI. All right, the next report that I want to talk to you about is fuel tracking. Okay, so this particular report covers all the usage that's not ESO and MIS, but there are some things that need comparison. So that's where we're going to talk about the fuel tracking. This is one that can be very confusing to people. In my previous classes and in my AEI best practices, I talk about the fuel drawing, the fuel map of how fuel moves around your installation. This report kind of helps you visually see how that works. Oh, it's not gonna, let's see if it works for me. Okay, so this is what I was gonna say. That's why I didn't want to do it. But in that same folder, there is a fuel tracking report, and I will show you what, show you what it looks like. All right, so in this fuel tracking report, you've got diesel fuel, gasoline, and jet fuel as different reports and tabs in the report, okay? And what it does is it tells you, okay, what you're saying is these are all of the tanks that contain jet fuel, and this is how much jet fuel went through these tanks, right? But now you're saying this is how much went into or was loaded into aircraft. Okay, so the fuel tank throughput should be consistent with the amount of fuel dispensed, right? Because theoretically, if the fuel is going into the tank, a very similar amount of fuel should be going out of the tank into the equipment, okay? And so for this particular one, I would start asking questions. Now, it could be that this is right, but to me, this seems suspect because we put twice as much fuel into the tanks as we took out. So either the tanks were empty at the beginning of the year, which is possible, or we somehow missed accounting for some of this fuel. Okay. And to me, it looks like what happened was we accounted for one tank's worth of fuel moving across the base. So I would expect these to be more in line with each other. It should look a little bit more like this. This is what went into the tanks. This is what went out of the tanks. Okay. And then for diesel fuel, we just forgot to account for fuel loading. So we used 74,000 gallons of diesel into the tanks, but we never accounted for where that went. Right, so this can kind of give you a hint of maybe you missed a step in your fuel map, or maybe there's just something off and you're not accounting for something, okay? So that's one of the things that you can look at to make sure that your fuel map is fully accounting for all of the fuel moving around base. Now, the reason why this is important is because, you know, tank throughputs and fuel dispensing and fuel loading can be a significant amount of fuel or emissions for your installation, okay? So it's one of the bigger source categories. Any questions about this report? Okay. All right, now the next one, the next report that I like to look at, and I'm just gonna try and get back into my business objects here and hope it didn't time out on me, is a comparison of usage from year to year. Now I'm just going to jump to these folders here. I have favorited them. I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. So if you go to folders, public aviation reports, PMO reports, air quality, and then you click on air quality assurance, or actually let's go here to air quality. You can, over here on the ellipses, you can click on more and you can add them to your favorites or remove them from your favorites. When you do that, they will show up on your home screen here under your favorites, and you can just double click on them and it'll take you straight to, that folder, okay? So the next report I wanted to talk about was usage year to year. Now that one is actually in the quality control folder. And we're just going to work off of an example because Business Objects does not like me today. So this one, you can run it for multiple years. So you can see I ran it for 2020 through 2023. And it's got several different tabs here that can compare the different types of usage logs. So this can kind of give you an idea of if my usage is significantly different from year to year, there's a good chance my emissions will be different from year to year. And so in that first screen that we talked about with the staging your AEI and the large fluctuation in emissions, this can help you catch those large fluctuations before you ever even get to the running calculation stage, okay? So you can catch mistakes earlier in the process. And so it just lets you see, okay, so this particular one stands out to me that we had 40 million cubic feet, 2,400 million cubic feet, 37 and 19. So to me, this year stands out, and I need to then understand, why did the usage change so much? Did I enter the usage in a different unit of measure maybe? My guess is they gave me cubic feet and I entered it in million cubic feet. And so that could be a problem. And you can kind of scroll through here. So here's another one. The gasoline dispensed was half the previous year. Why was that maybe, right? And so it just kind of lets you look at a side-by-side comparison of, you know, this is what my base did last year. Are the numbers within range? And if not, then talk to the shop, talk to the people that gave you the numbers and make sure you're understanding, do I have the right units of measure? Do I have did they give me the right data? Did I write it down wrong? Did I enter it wrong? And so this can kind of give you an idea of where you stand with that, okay? Same thing with IC engine usage comparison. This can also help you see, did I, exceed my maintenance and test hours for the calendar year? Is that going to be a problem with the federal regulations? It can let you know if you have any large emergency runs, right? Jet engine testing, same thing. And then tank throughputs as well. Okay. So let me see if I can get that report to run real quick so you can see how you can refresh it. So this one is down here in usage year to year. Once again, like I said, it's going to be somebody else's data when you come in here, so you need to click the refresh button. And it's going to let you select your report year. And you can check however many years you want. The more years you select, the longer it's going to take to refresh the report. And same with the size of your installation. So there we go. So this is the report. Let's go to usage comparison. So as you can see here, we've got pretty consistent numbers for a lot of the sources, right? But it can help you identify any data anomalies that you have here. Okay. Any questions about that report? Okay, so a lot of these are just, the review of what did I enter? Do I have any big data entry errors that stand out that I need to address? And this all can be done before you enter your emission calculations. Okay. Now I want to go look at, there's another report that can kind of let you look at all of the data. Now, during my AEI best practices class, I discussed the fact that you need to review all of the data that you have in your processes. Some things require parameters to be updated. Make sure that your algorithms are what you expect to be assigned. And so as a general rule, as part of the AEI best practices, I would run these AEI collection and summary reports so that you can look at what your data is all in one place. That way you can make sure you're accounting for the new sources. You've end dated the sources that you know have been removed. And just an example, that's a pretty big report. So I'm just going to show it here. But in this report, it will tell you these are all of my ABCL processes and the materials that they use. These are all the pieces of equipment that are associated. For anything that you would expect a process control on, it will tell you what those are. Your parameter information as well. Your calculation methodology, So for things like boilers, make sure that you're taking into account all your low NOx controls. For AECOM, make sure that you have the right algorithm assigned that matches the rated horsepower of the engine, the model year, and the liters of displacement. Okay. The more accurate you are in calculation methodology, the better your emission estimates will be. So this is a good quick check to say, am I doing what I think? And then this report also has a usage comparison. So you can see for this particular process, you can see all of the usage that's been entered. They can help you look at that same thing with usage year to year. And as you can see, all of your different source categories are going to have their own tab. Okay. So I highly recommend this report. I'm just showing it quickly here now because this all should be confirmed as you're doing your AEI. But because it does affect the quality of your AEI, I wanted to make sure that everybody in this class was also aware of it. Okay. So that is basically all of the reports that can help you as you're doing your AEI. So now we're going to need to transition to the fact that, okay, we have documented all of our usage. We've gone and reviewed it. We made sure that we are not missing any processes. We are making sure that we're entering negative documentation and we don't have any numbers that are outliers and everything's in the right unit of measure. So at that point in time, you're going to run your emission calculations and be ready to review the results of that. Okay. But the first thing that you need to do is after you've run your calculations, there's this duplicate calculation of emissions. So what happens is a lot of times instead of running the same calcs each year, oops, sorry, that's the wrong place. Instead of going to emission calculation and using the same annual stationary emissions every year, they may rename it to something different that says stationary source emissions, okay? And so this one may be, if somebody comes in, there's a chance that they ran the calculations under this one and this one for the same year. And in that case, you could possibly be double reporting, or you could erroneously add multiple calcs to your AEI submittal. This kind of just gives you a mapping of what particular processes are calculating for the same pollutants at the same time frame. Okay, and so once again, you hit refresh and it's going to pull everything and let you know what is being calculated for during that time frame. This can help you clean up your structure. So anytime you have processes that are associated to multiple calculation packages, there is the potential to over-report. We see this a lot of bases. And it's the entire reason why when you do your inventory submittal, you have to select specific emission calculations to include. Now, if you're using business objects to look at your emissions and you don't have a filter on the calculation name, it's going to go take everything that's been calculated for and total it up. And you may or may not know where those emissions are coming from, okay? So this report's very useful to say, okay, let's just take a look at this particular AECOM process. Let's say carbon monoxide is part of 3 different calculations for this time frame. So then I can come over here and I can look at that AECOM process. And there's filters on it that you can filter at the top of the page. I'm just going to try and scroll through real quick. I can look at a particular AECOM process or degreasing process, and I can see that during May, it's part of the ozone season and the stationary source calc, okay? And so this can help you identify where you've got the duplicate reporting or the duplicate calculation to make sure that you're not accounting for it multiple times. A common mistake that we see is that they may have that process associated to the ESO calc for like surface coating and the stationary calc. And in that case, they would select both calculations and double report. So you want to make sure that you're not doing that. So this is a good exercise just to make sure that you don't have that potential issue, okay? Any questions about this report and how to use it? Now, in this case, they have their calculation structure set up this way, but I can tell you that they are not double reporting because of the way that they have submitted their AEIs. They're okay. But if you have new people, air quality managers, if you have a new fence-to-fence contractor come in that maybe isn't aware of the previous calculation structure, or you're a new air quality manager that's coming in, this can help you understand how things are structured within your database to help avoid those types of pitfalls. Okay. Now, the last kind of report that I want to talk about, and I talked about it in my previous class, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit, but there is an ESO data QA report that can review that usage. It's a very detailed report. We talked about it during the ESO training, so I suggest you go find that recording if you're not familiar with that. We will use it here in a minute to help diagnose an error. Okay. So this has all been just kind of general quality assurance things. Now we've run our emissions. The next step is to see what our emissions are. Now, before I stage my AEI, I can come into quality control and I can get an emission summary report to kind of know what things are going to be. So this requires your calculations to be run, but does not require them to be staged. And this kind of just shows you a good idea of where your emissions are coming from. It's got the nice little bar chart. It lets you see a good general summary that you can look at and say, do these numbers look right? Okay. The next report I'm going to talk about is, that's great, but if you have no context for it, it's hard to tell how does that compare to last year. So the next report we're going to look at is emissions year to year. Okay, and this one has a couple different tabs. It's got the criteria pollutant and total HAPs, and it gives you a graphical side by side. So as you can see, this is a good example of this report. You can see that their emissions are usually pretty much within a specific range. You've got the table down here that's segregated by source category and process to let you know specifically how each process and each source category matched up from year to year. Okay. So this is a little bit more detailed version of what you see in the front end. The next thing you've got is individual HAPs. So let's say that you had a large fluctuation in your total HAPs. This is going to allow you to see where maybe it came from and what your individual HAPs were. It's also going to take the top 5 HAPs, individual HAPs, so that you can kind of look at, okay, these are my top 5 emitters. So then you can key in on them. There are filters up here at the top. You click on that, you can say, let's go look at ethylene glycol specifically. It will filter the graph and the table below to say these are all of your ethylene glycol emissions. So it can help you nail down what particular sources are contributing to that particular HAP being high. Okay. And the same can be done over here. If you want to see, you can filter on, let's say, let's go down to the bottom here. Let's look at oxides of nitrogen. It will filter the graph on just NOx. It'll filter my table down below to just NOx. And let me take a look at all the potential sources of my NOx. Additionally, it'll give you a breakdown of these are the source categories that contribute to your NOx. On a year-to-year basis, this pie chart should be pretty consistent. If you end up with something that looks completely different, then you had some sort of mission change and you need to take a look at that, okay? Now I'm going to pull up one of the pre-run reports that I had so that we can look at a particular scenario. Okay, so when I look at this report, is there anything that stands out? We had a lot higher CO and NOx during this particular year. So I would maybe want to look and understand why it went so different. Now, if we go look at the HAPs, and this is the scenario we're going to talk about, when I see a large spike like this, it makes me want to ask questions, okay? So as we can see, our toluene is 6.5 tons during 2022. And if I was to hover over, it's a fraction of that in every other year. So let's find toluene. So I'm just going to go down to the toluene section. If I was in the report, I would just use the filter at the top. But I can see here and help identify where is the big spike coming in HAPs. And I can see here that it's probably coming from base-wide surface coating. As you can see, I'm looking, previous years it was 0.24 and here is 5 tons. So this particular process right here is contributing to a majority of those pollutants, okay? So normally, if you guys saw this, how do you think you would go about finding where this came from? How do I understand why this is high? Right? So that's the problem that everybody has. Okay, the number's high, but how do I know why? So we're going to talk about how, if this was my AEI, how do I tell the root cause of this spike in emissions? Okay. And so for this, we want to remember that it's process number 731288. If I was to go into the front end of APIMS and go to my unique process, I would be able to tell that this particular process is the next higher process for a lot of ESO processes, which means this usage is coming from ESO. And so it's going to be really hard to find which ESO process contributed the material that had that toluene in it, right? Because there's thousands of records coming over from ESO MIS. And that's where our ESO MIS data QA QC report comes in. The other thing, we're going to look at that in a second, but how do I know which ESO process to look at? So there's 2 ways you can attack this problem. The first one is I go to my quality assurance, and there's a report that is called process emission details, okay? When I run this report, it is going to tell me every single thing that was calculated for that time frame. And it's going to give you all the calculation details. I call this the everything report. If you have a regulator that wants to say, how did you get that number? This report is going to show you. Okay. And it's even taking a long time to open it in Excel. So that's why I wanted to make sure it was pre-run. Thinking about it. Okay. Maybe it's going to let me open it. So like I said, this report has everything. And so it is a very large report. It will run in business objects. If it doesn't, just wait a little bit, maybe run it at an off hour, but it should run. I don't think I usually ever have any problems with it running. It just might take a little bit. Okay, so this process emission details report has everything that you would want to know. It's got the emission start date, the source category, base specific, the process, the algorithm code. It even has the algorithm formula. And next to it is the calculation formula. So as you can see here, the consumption was 0.58 and the ingredient percent was 0.0175. So it's telling you exactly what numbers it pulled from the different tables in order to get that number. And so if I see that I have a large spike in toluene, I would want to come to this report and I would want to filter on the chemical name of toluene. And it's going to tell me every single time toluene was calculated for and which process it was calculated. So it's even going to include my tanks. Okay. I can either then look at the quantity used or I can look at the tons emitted. So in this case, I'm going to come to the tons emitted and I'm just going to look for some of the bigger emitters. And as you can see, I've highlighted a few here. So if I look at this, these 2 records right here, it was 6,400 pounds and 8,000 pounds of some sort of material that contributed 1.2 and 1.3 tons. Okay, and if I was to add all of these up, it comes up to about 4.3. So if I'm looking at this, what I've got is Gorilla White acrylic zone marking paint. And I've got SB Premium Acrylic White, probably also a zone marking paint. And I can see that this is the stock number for it. These are the dates that it was used. And it was, once again, it was that base wide surface coating process, right? And so I can either filter on the process, I can filter on the pollutant, but it's going to tell me everywhere that it's coming from. So now, based on this, we knew that it was an ESO process. So this report isn't going to tell me anything other than that particular material. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go to my ESO QA report. And I can see I've already got this filtered for Gorilla. I believe I just filtered on Gorilla. And this can tell me the exact ESO process that it came from. So the next step that I would want to do, and this is that AEI that we saw where Lackland had a huge spike in HAPs. We said it was due to marking paint. This is the scenario that we went out. But we had to go through this activity in order to determine where was this coming from. Otherwise, we just saw a large spike in toluene and we had no idea where it came from. But now that I know this, I can go find out what shop this is and who the point of contact is. And I can go to them and I can say, was this part of a large purchase? Did you really use all of this paint, or did you just purchase it and set it in your shop? Because as you know, ESO-MIS has a consume on receipt. So if they still have the paint cans in their shop, you can probably unvalidate some of this because it wasn't used during that year. And then rerun your calcs. You can do all kinds of different things, but you need to follow up and say, okay, why were you using this much paint this year versus other years? Is this something that you're going to do again next year and every year? Was this a temporary project? And so you can kind of understand, like, hey, why was this year so much different than every other year? You can also talk to them and say, hey, this particular material has a large hazardous air pollutant that we need to be concerned of. Can we look for alternative materials if this is something that you're going to be using on a regular basis? Okay. So I know I kind of went through that particular activity fast, but did anybody have any questions how you can use one report and another report to find exactly where you might have an issue? Do you want me to go through it again? Has anybody had this scenario where you had a spike in a particular pollutant and you had trouble finding out why? Okay, so I'm going to go through it one more time just to make sure that everybody saw how I traced through the different reports to do that. So the first report is I looked at my emissions year to year. And I looked for any outliers or any spikes. So we can look at, let's do this again for ethylene glycol. As you can see in 2022, the ethylene glycol was also really high. So I can see that ethylene glycol is high. I can come down to here and see if I can nail down which process it is, or I can go straight to my process emission details report. And I can, let's see here. Oops, let's clear the filters. I can search on ethylene. Ethylene glycol. And I can see all of the different places that had ethylene glycol. So this is a really common one. People will validate their ESO usage and maybe validate things that shouldn't be validated. So in this case, I can see that the areas of concern are probably this particular line. These two lines. So these are going to be my biggest problems. So at that point in time, I want to go look at the material. And so I can see here I had 3,000 pounds of full force concentrate antifreeze and coolant. And I had 1,500 pounds of another antifreeze and coolant and 1,500 pounds of fleet charge. So in this case, what action should I take? So for this one, antifreeze and coolant, if you have attended any of the ESO trainings, antifreeze, the way that it is used is it goes from a container that's closed into a vehicle that's a closed loop system. So you're pouring it into something, putting the lid on it. It is never being exposed to the air to evaporate out, okay? And once it's out of the closed loop system, it goes into a waste stream and it becomes a waste problem. And so in this case, anything that's used in a closed loop system, that usage should not be validated. So what I would do in this scenario is I would find this stock number. I would go to my usage log consumption. I would search up that stock number. And for the particular year that I'm talking about, I would unvalidate it, save, and rerun my calculations. And by doing that, I increase the accuracy of my AEI, and you can see that my it would reduce my ethylene glycol emissions significantly, right? I think we just took off how many, what were the emission, we cut it down to almost nothing, right? And then because I saw this, that all of these ethylene glycols, most of these, so I would go through while I was doing this and identify any of the other antifreeze and coolant materials and stock numbers and do the same thing there. And I think this one is also one. Now, when you see something like this, I would go look it up and find out exactly what this is to make sure that I understand what that material is and how it's being used. But if you unvalidate these records, as you should, because they're not going to truly be emitted, you're significantly reducing not only your total HAP emissions, but the individual HAP emissions for ethylene glycol. Okay. Any questions about that? There are other reports under here. This one's a little bit more of a pollutant search. You've got this is a good way to check your algorithms if you don't want to do the AEI collection. This is a mapping of every process to the algorithms that are used. Same with the calculation methodology. If your regulator wants to know how did you calculate emissions, it's got that there. And then this will tell you which processes are tied to which calculations. So this is kind of like the duplicate emission calculation report. So there's a lot of good tools and tips and tricks out there. I probably use the emission year to year with HAPS in combination with the process emission details report to find where I have any particular issues. But this is the first place I go, is the process emission details area. Okay. So if I saw the ethylene glycol, let's go back to the toluene. I could say in my comment in the screens, find the highlighted one. increase due to significant use of this particular material for this particular activity. That is the comment. Oops. That is a comment that I would put in my emission inventory submittal screen to account for why those emissions were higher. All right, I know I scheduled this class for 2 hours. I didn't know how many questions I would have. But those are the reports that I wanted to show you. Those are some of the activities that I wanted to show you. There is one other thing that I want to talk about. And I talked about this in my AEI best practices class, but when you go to the emission calculation area, do not forget under runs to look at your error messages. There's a whole tab here that's going to tell you if you have no algorithms assigned or no usage records found. Make sure that you understand these and review them. Okay, so for no algorithms assigned, I can come and find out the exact process. If I have this error, emissions are not going to be calculated, right? Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any scenarios that they've come across in past AEI years that they wanted to discuss or get answers to? I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can just have a free discussion after that, but I thank everyone for your time.